We are going to get started, and as people are logging in, if you'd like to chime in on the chat button at the bottom of your screen, that would be great. We'd love to know kind of who's joining us this evening. And this is the Waypoint 55 webinar, where we discuss ministry-related topics in 55 minutes or less. We've been doing this for about 5 years, and it's been a great service to our partners around the region in ministry settings, mostly for lay leaders, and in particular in areas of ministry where they're not being resourced or equipped very well. And so whether it's prayer team leaders, missions team leaders, elders, men's and women's ministry leaders, prayer team leaders, there's just a number of areas that there are leaders in your church that would love to be resourced and empowered a little better. And so Waypoint has a topic every month. And so we've been doing this for more than 5 years now. And I'm going to share the screen here, but Mid-Atlantic Christian University has been our partner sponsoring our webinar platform since the very beginning. So we're very thankful for them as a ministry partner in the region, serving the same churches here in our region, located in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. So thank you to Mid-Atlantic Christian University and all of our friends there. If you join us tonight live, that's a benefit because we get to interact a little bit better, but we do have a YouTube channel and if you just search for Waypoint Church Partners, this is a little dated. We've got now 313 subscribers. So we finally passed the 300 mark on the number of subscribers. So if you hit the subscribe button on the YouTube channel, you'll start receiving us in your feed, in the algorithm. And if you hit the little bell as you subscribe, then you'll be notified when the newest webinar or other video gets added to our YouTube page. And you'll also see that they are in playlists. And so there are certain ones, all the ones for elders are in one playlist. All the ones for discipleship topics are in there for one. First impressions team, guest services teams, safety and security teams. And so you can kind of just look at the area or recommend other leaders at your church to check those out. And so so far this year, we've averaged about right at 250 views per month of one of our webinars after the fact on our YouTube channel. So we're really thankful for that. And so we exist to catalyze kingdom growth. We certainly we plant new churches all around the region, 2 or 3 every year, but we also partner with established churches to help them get on mission and stay on mission. And so if we do our job well, part of our vision frame is that we envision an ever increasing number of churches and leaders in our region. And that's what we're talking about tonight, is to see your small groups ministry thrive like never before. And so we're talking about small group ministry, and for every church, it's structured a little bit differently. And so I'm going to share a format that I personally have been using and honing. I don't know if I've been perfecting it, but using it and honing it for the last 25 years. And some of the I've been using some of the principles of this all for years and sharing that. And so I'm going to be sharing that with you this evening. And so the title of it is Turf and Surf, which of course, there is I've got a picture here for this. Go back to this. Of course, there's the surf and turf meal that you can get at a restaurant, which is a lot of people's favorite. I'm not that big fan of the surf part, but the turf part, if there's a good steak at Outback, I like that, but my son likes the surf and turf. And the idea is there's really kind of 2 main things going on in your meal. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, is 2 big things that can be happening that you can really move the needle on in your small group ministry. And I don't know if this is going to work. I'm experimenting with this, but I've embedded a video in this slide here from one of our church planters, Kevin McNeil, and I trained him, explained to him this surf and turf method that he didn't describe. And hopefully the video will play and you'll be able to hear it. It's been a while since I've done a video like this, so we'll see.
Tim Cole, what up, man? I just want you to know that I will never, ever, ever do small groups any other way except the method that you described, breaking into 3 or 4 people. I have been in ministry for more than 10 years, and never have I experienced a community group or a small group or whatever with that much excitement. I told my people, I said, hey, you guys are in my group. I'm going to experiment and we're going to do something new. And I gave them a week heads up. And then I gave them all questions and we split into groups. And then we came back and we talked about it. And not only did we not, like, we finished earlier because conversation was better, and like it was more quality conversation rather than one person taking all day to answer. We felt like we could all contribute and talk, but everyone was like, man, I love this. And then right before I left, there was a girl that came and she's so shocked. She came up to me and she said, hey, this is the best group I've ever been a part of ever. And I said, yeah. And she said, yeah, can we always do this? And I was like, we can absolutely always do this. And she said, I was about to give up on community groups, but this was amazing. So, bro, I cannot tell you enough. Thank you so much for this idea. Definitely going to steal it. I'm going to make all my leaders do it. This is incredible. So, bye, yo. Hope you have a good day. Peace.
All right, somebody hit the chat button. Let me know if that worked. When we first started doing videos in Zoom years ago, it often didn't work very well. The sound, it would glitch or whatever. But all right, Bill is saying it works. So I need to take Kevin around with me as my hype man for that video. But he was driving home from his small group at Canvas Christian Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina, and I was so happy that he said that. Sent that video to me via text. And so we're going to talk about that. I don't know if it always worked as great as it did for his group, but I hope it does, or at least improve. And but first I want to kind of talk about the background, the history, as best I know it, at least from my perspective about small groups. And for me, even the genesis of small groups really has been during my adult life, starting from Bible college. In Bible college, I had an advisor and a professor, Dr. Eleanor Daniel, in the education department, and she taught in when you teach a Bible lesson, which at that point it might not have been in small groups because small groups were kind of new then. I'm old enough that it was kind of a new idea, but that the first question, the icebreaker question, she called buzz groups. And that was the term that she used for them, but it was just exclusively for the icebreaker. And so rather than going around the small group with 12 people in the living room and everybody answer, so what was the car that you drove when you were in high school? And everybody talks about that. And she'd say, break into groups of 3 or 4, or maybe even 2, and answer this question. Because the point of an icebreaker question is just to get people used to talking for your group. And so you literally break the ice. Not literally, but you break the ice verbally by asking them a simple question. I love nostalgia questions with groups because everybody loves to talk about back when they were in high school or back when they were in junior high. And so it's not an intimidating question. And so, what was the first job that you had that you got a real paycheck for? Or what car did you drive? What clunker car did you drive when you first got your license or whatever? So she would advise, because not everybody needs to hear the answer to that question. It would be fun to. But the point is to get people talking. And so those were called buzz groups, 2, 3 at max 4. And so I love that because I noticed when we would do that in class when I at the now departed Cincinnati Bible College and Seminary, God rest her soul, the room was a buzz. I mean, buzz groups were perfectly named for that because the room would buzz as everybody's talking about their old car or their favorite song when they were in junior high or whatever it was. And then I have to get serious and get back on the lesson. And I thought, man, wouldn't it be great for us to have that kind of conversation going on all the time? Of course, the history of small groups goes back to, let me share the screen here again. The history of it goes back to the small group, the Sunday school class, and for churches for 100 years with the history of Sunday school, you'd meet on Sunday morning, an hour before church, and you'd have 8, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50 people in a Sunday school class, and there'd be a teacher. And often it would be pretty much a lecture. If a guy was really skilled or whoever the teacher was really skilled, they would involve people and it would be interactive. But functionally, you were limited in the size of your Sunday school class by the size of your room, which was typically 20, 30, 40 people. And so the conversation is different in that setting. Usually there were chairs all facing forward. There was a chalkboard or whatever. And there was a lot of elements of small groups that happened later in the 80s and 90s. They're in good Sunday school classes, some of those holistic community life dynamics were still in play, people taking care of each other and good conversation. But by and large, it was quite a task to give a lesson for most of the time. The teacher would ask questions, someone answer the question, he would say, yeah, that's right or wrong. And it was all back and forth just to the teacher person. And so those were typically the dynamics. And so then when I was in college, we moved into the idea of breaking into small groups, and it was kind of a new thing. And actually, when I did my residency, when I first got into ministry, they were doing like a small group training, regional, and people came from all over the region. A couple hundred people came to get trained on this is the way you do small groups. And it was a 2-day deal, Friday and Saturday. And it was a big deal for people to learn how small groups were more powerful, and you're doing life together. And it was kind of juxtaposed against Sunday school. And then a lot of churches had to decide, are we going to do Sunday school? We're going to do small groups. Are they going to compete with each other? Are we going to kill Sunday school and do small groups because they're better, or whatever? And that became the big raging debate during the 90s, is how small groups. And the first church that I served at as an associate pastor, part of my job was to start small groups at that church. And they'd never had them. And so it was difficult because your best small group leaders were probably your best Sunday school teachers as well. And so then are you going to double dip and make them do both, or how are you going to work that? And so it was kind of a challenge. Then I got to lead in a new church in Virginia Beach 25 years ago. And part of my role there was to start small groups. And we were not a church that had small groups. We were a church of small groups, that we structured all of our church life around our small groups, our pastoral care, our announcements, our teaching, our community, everything happened through our small groups. And so it was easy. By the time I left there many years later, we had 36 active groups that were grouped into 6 teams of 6 groups, with a coach or a kind of a captain of each of those 6 groups that they oversaw and supervised and supported. And so got to develop a pretty robust small group ministry. And it was during that time that I developed this turf and surf model of small group. And part of it was because I thought that the model that was being used for small groups had a faulty assumption. And that faulty assumption was that 12 is the perfect number for groups, because Jesus had 12 apostles. And so that's like the perfect size. And I think it's really difficult to lead a group of 12 or 15 people. There is no other time in our American culture that you have 12 people trying to have one conversation at a time. It's just unlike any other time. And it's, I think, kind of one of the reasons why people don't want to join a small group like we promote them in the church, is because I think there's 2 settings that we kind of think of when we think of small groups, and neither of them are all that positive. One of them would be like your typical AA group, where everybody goes around and talks about, their addiction or whatever their hang up is. And so why would I want to be part of a group that's in this circle that's like an AA group? Or the other image that for me goes back to when I was starting to learn how to do small groups. The movie Jerry Maguire came out about more than 25 years ago. I don't know if you remember that movie, but throughout the movie, there's this group of ladies that meet in a home one night a week, and they're all single and kind of bitter about their relationships or lack of them with guys, and they're going around the room. And if you remember that's at the end, finally the gal, Renee Zellweger's character, she joins the group because she's broken up with Tom Cruise, and then he comes in the door and says, "You complete me," and she says, "Stop! You had me at hello. You had me at hello." And I was like, "Doggone it! I thought this was a sports movie, and it's a chick flick." All of a sudden, I realized at the end this was really a chick flick. But this group here of these ladies going around the room ragging on relationships, I think is why one of the reasons why guys might not want to be a part of groups, is because they think it's kind of like this. And even when I think about Jesus and the 12 apostles, number one, if Jesus was good at leading a group of 12, a discussion with 12 people, he was the Lord. And so people, they would probably stop and listen to him. And he was pretty good with relationships. So maybe he could pull off a discussion with 12 people, but I'm not sure other people are equipped for that, particularly the lay leaders in our church. It's just something that they never do. And I don't know if you've been watching the Chosen series that's been going for a couple seasons now. And it's fascinating when you watch that. My wife is all into that. It's a great, great series. If you haven't gotten into that, I'm an unpaid promoter for that. It's really good. But it's interesting to me that most of the time that Jesus, in at least in this series, most of the time that Jesus is interacting with his disciples, it's not all 12 of them. Jesus will speak to the crowd, like on a Sunday morning, like we would speak to the crowd. But then while they're walking along, it's in threes and fours, and then he'll go over and he'll talk to this 3 or 4 over here. Then he'll walk up on ahead, and they're doing a lot of walking all over Israel. They need to get an Uber or at least those electrified scooters like we'd have today, but they just walk every series. They're walking, and Jesus will go talk, like this is Peter right here. He'll go talk to these 2 or 3 for a little while. Then he'll go talk to these 2 or 3 for a while. And I think that is more legit about the kind of discussions that are natural for humans to have. And so for me, the breakthrough moment for me, the aha moment, the eureka moment for me happened when I was teaching a seminar about small group leadership and development at Southeast Christian Church when the North American Christian Convention was held there one year. It was still the North American Christian Convention. And this is the lobby of Southeast Christian Church here. And before the session that I was going to go teach, we had younger kids at the time, and I needed to go drop off my kids to their classes for the kids, which was upstairs down the hallway. You can see this little yellow star over here on this picture. It was down that hallway. And when I dropped off my kids, I came back and I stood at that railing, that glass railing, and down below there were hundreds of people, probably about 1,000 people milling around in conversation in the lobby between sessions, between workshop sessions. And I knew what I was going to be teaching on in this next hour about small groups. And so I took a moment and I looked at all the people talking down there in this mass. And I don't have a picture of it. This was pre-cell phone for me. And so, so I didn't have an iPhone where I could snap a picture. I do have some other pictures that I grabbed that would be similar, like this church here or this church here. But the idea is, as I watched all the people in this group, I started counting numerically the number of people in a group, a conversation group, and the number of conversations in that group, if that makes any sense. And so I would see 2 people over here talking face to face, one group, 2 people, one conversation. And then I'd look over here and there'd be 3 people. And maybe we can even look at that over here. If you can imagine looking down at here, there'd be 3 people over here and they'd all be engaged, 3 people, one conversation. Then I'd look over here and there'd be a group of 4 people. And with 4 people, it would almost always still be one conversation, but occasionally it would be 2 conversations. The couples would kind of pair off and talk. But then it would get to 5. And at 5, it was almost always 2 conversations. Occasionally there would be one conversation, but almost always, like 80% of the time, a group of 5 had naturally 2 conversations happening in that discussion, in that little discussion pod. And so if there were 6 or 7 in a group, it was always at least 2 conversations, if not more. And so you can kind of see here, these 3 gals over here talking over here, and there's 3 here over here. There's 4 here, all one conversation. There's 2 people talking here, and so on. And I got to look over and it made me think that naturally, as people are standing around in conversation, the natural setting is groups of 2 or 3 or 4 or maybe 5. And it reminded me of the buzz groups that I was taught by Dr. Eleanor Daniel at Cincinnati Bible College when we started our lesson time in a Christian education setting, Sunday school class, is you have an icebreaker, break people into groups of 2 or 3 at 4 at most, and let them have that one conversation. And I started to structure my small groups around that natural dynamics for the way people talk. Naturally, the natural discussion dynamics of group dynamics. And it changed groups so much because there's no other setting, like I said, where you're asked to sit in a circle with 12 people and manage all the discussion dynamics of 12 people. And part of the reason for that is this, and maybe you would agree with me, and I would say this is roughly statistically correct. It's just intuitive. But when you've got a group of 12 people sitting in the living room for a small group, I would say that roughly about 1/3 of the group does most of the talking. 3 or 4 people do most of the talking. And then roughly about 1/3 of the group does some of the talking. They'll chime in once or twice during the discussion. And then about 1/3 of the group, there's 3 or 4 people, maybe only two, maybe 4 or 5, but about 1/3 of the group do almost no talking, that they will never chime up in the whole group setting. And I think, well, it's efficient to have all 12 people in one group. And people think, well, it's a living room setting. And so why don't we get everybody in the living room and discuss? But how often do you have 12 people in your living room other than small group night? Almost never, except for Thanksgiving or maybe a big football game, Super Bowl. But otherwise, normal conversation in your living room is 2, 3, 4 people, maybe 5, 6 or 7. But if it's 6 or 7, probably 2 conversations. And so I thought that even though it's efficient to have 12 people in one room, that it's not as effective to get everybody talking. And one of the early trainings that I went to about small groups, a guy made kind of this broad assumption that I thought to myself, I don't know if that's true, because I had to think about it for a while. But then the more and more I thought about it, I believe it is true. And here's the assumed principle about small groups, that you'll be most impressed by what you express. You'll be most impressed by what you express. And what I mean by that, and what the small group training leaders said, was that you're going to remember and actually be impressed. You're going to change, be impacted more by the things that you say out loud than what other people say. That when you are involved in a spiritual conversation in a small group setting, and you say, you know what, I think it's like this, or for me, this is what happens for me, or whenever you get up the gumption to have to say it out loud, man, things really change for you. That it initiates change because you've had to express that idea and that concept. And when he first said that, well, I don't know. But then I was able to think back to many of the small groups that I've been a part of up to them. And I thought, well, yeah, it's when I spoke up and said, for me, I really struggle with this spiritual discipline, and here's why, or whatever the topic was. And then I started working on that spiritual discipline because I said out loud, I kind of confessed that was a spiritual discipline that I struggled with. And so now this is an assumed principle. It's an urban legend. I don't know if anybody's ever studied this. There's probably been psychological studies out there and all the doctoral programs there's ever been on group dynamics. But that's the principle that I'm kind of working from. Whether it's true or not, I believe intuitively it's generally true, is that you're going to be really impacted by the stuff that you say out loud. And the problem with a typical small group setting is that if there's 12 people, or if it's 10 or 15, really doesn't matter. But if there's 12 people in a living room, 12 people, the perfect number with the disciples, actually it'd be 13 because Jesus was there too. And 13 is my favorite number. But 12, 13 people. The problem is at any one time, you have one person talking, 12 people listening. And so, you got 8% of the people talking and 92% not talking. And if most people are going to be impacted by the stuff they say, I want to get that quotient up. But in that setting, it doesn't work, because if you got 2 or 3 or 4 people talking, it's kind of chaos in the room. And you got to go, hold on. Susie's talking right now. We'll come to you next. And you don't want people talking over each other. And so to structure a setting that promotes the most conversation is the turf part of this idea about small groups. And that is based on the fact that for most American homes, they are naturally set up for multiple conversations happening in different rooms. Almost every home. And I've done this in small groups where we went to a different house every night, for 8 weeks. 8 people volunteered, and we could do it in every house, or we could do it in my house. In my house, it works every time. So I've got a diagram here that I want to share with you about what the typical uh, the typical house looks like in America. And this may not be, the perfect example, but here's a schematic of a house. And most houses, you're going to have your small group here in the living room, and you're going to cram everybody in there. It feels great when that living room's crammed. Everybody's in there, and it just feels good when everybody's in there. But it'll hold 8, 10, 12. You put people in the back row behind the couch, get up to 16, and that's great. But for the kind of conversation, spiritual conversation, where people get to chime in and talk about what they're feeling about this conversation, it's really ineffective. But most churches or houses, though, could be broken up into 4 natural spaces. You got the living room is one. You got a den is another one. Most houses have some kind of a den. And then there's the dining room that's almost never used. Sometimes the living room is never used and the den is, or vice versa. And then there's the kitchen. And so you can break up into groups of 3 or 4, depending on how many people you have there that night, during your group, and say, I want you to talk about these questions. And here's what happens. Those people that never say anything in a group in the living room, when they're all in there, every one of them will talk when they're broken up into one of these little pods around the house. And you can also, if it's nice, if they got a screened-in porch, you can skip the dining room and go out into the screen-in porch, or if the weather's good or whatever, or if you have a huge group to have a 5th location, whatever. Actually, if there is a 5th spot that you can go to, like a screened-in porch, I love that, because I like to leave the kitchen alone if possible. And so when someone's done with their group, they can go refill their soda or get some cookies or whatever are in the kitchen while the other groups are finishing up. So I would actually try and stay away from the kitchen if possible. It's not always possible. Usually the kitchen table is perfect for conversation, but when it is. And so that's the turf side that I would talk about. The turf and surf is to have pods around the house, which almost all houses have them, and divide people up, not for the whole session. That's the important thing. I'm going to show you a schedule of a kind of a sample schedule of how this would work. But for the chunk of the time, the good discussion time, I would break up. And so I'm going to pause right there. I don't know if you've got any questions. There is a question and answer button, a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you've got questions about what I've said, I don't know if I've been clear yet, but I'd like to share with you the sample schedule of what that looks like, and then start talking about apprenticing. That's the second thing going on, like the turf and surf, that you're going to surf, and you're not going to lead any of the groups as the group leader, believe it or not. You're going to surf around the house, and so other people have to be leading the groups, and which is awesome. And so let me share a schedule with you. If anybody's got a question, I'm looking so far, no questions. But if you think of a question of something that I haven't been clear on, or I need to explain a little better, please hit the Q&A button, and I'll try and respond to that. All right, let me share the screen back again. So where am I at? Well, let me go back to this. So numerically, here's how you break out in your house. If you've got 1 to 5 people, you stay in the living room. If you got 6 people, you're going to have 3 people in 2 places. And I can't tell you how often, if you have a group of 12 or 15, if there's only 6, you'll be tempted to stay all in one group. It's like, well, I only have people here tonight. We'll just all stay in the living room, because the living room can easily fit 6 people. Don't succumb to that temptation. If you got 6 people, remember, our goal is to have as many people talking. And so if I can have 2 groups of 3 people, that means at any one time during the discussion component, I'm going to have 2 out of 6 people. A third of the people are talking, 33%, rather than 12%. So I've tripled, the ratio there. That's really good. Or actually, it'd be 1 out of 6 here. So I've doubled the ratio. Then if I got 7 people, it's 4 in one group, 3 in the other. If I've got 8 people, it's 4 in one group, 4 in the other. If you get, so you've split into 2 rooms. As soon as you hit 9 people, I would not try and do in 2 groups, because 5 people gets to that point where it's almost 2 conversations happening if it gets out of hand. So if it's 9 people, don't do 4 and 5, 3, 3, 3. And then if there's 10 people, there's 4, 3, 3, 11, 12. Then once you get to 13 people, that's the magic number. Now I'm going to go to 4, groups. I'm going to, yeah, do I do that right? So 9, 10, 11, 12. So I'm going to do 4, 3, 3, 3, and all the way up to then where I've got 16 people. If I have 16 people, I'm going to have 4 at each group. And so avoid the temptation to have fewer groups. You're actually trying to have as many groups as you can, not as few groups as you can. So don't say, oh, well, let's only have 2 groups tonight. If you can do 3, do 3, because you're going to increase the number of people that are expressing how they're being impressed by this conversation. And that's the power of being part of a discussion group like this. So that being said, let me tell you a sample schedule and some of the principles there. So let's say, for example, your small group meets on Tuesday night and you start at 7 o'clock. And so for some reason, the best part of a small group, in my opinion, is those first 15 minutes when you're around the kitchen catching up and you're eating snacks and all the kids are getting settled in the basement downstairs, all that kind of stuff. And you got to be careful because you want that time to last, because that's great conversation, but it can't drag on for 30, 35 minutes either, because you got stuff to do. And so I'm always torn. And I always have in my small groups what's called, well, a number of roles that you assign the first night. But one of them is the watchdog, which they're watching the time, because I'm trying to go talk to people, how you doing, you know, all that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden it's 7:25. So there's one person in every group of 12 that's time conscious, and they will be thrilled if they get to be the one that says, hey, Tim, we got 2 minutes. And I'm like, oh, thanks for reminding me. And then I'll say, okay, folks, it's about time to go in the living room. Refill your cup of coffee. And so have a watchdog, and that's going to be really important at the end. So then you go in the living room, and you got your big group in the living room. All right. So you got all 12 people, 16 people, 8 people, however many you got for the night. And at 7:15, and everybody settles down. They're still jibber jabbering about what they were talking about in the living room. But you're going to be in there 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 25 minutes the longest, just depending on how you're structuring this. But from 7:15 to 7:35, you're going to talk about the text of whatever your curriculum is for the night. That may be related to the sermon if you're doing sermon series, and maybe the church produces questions for you. That's fine. Maybe there's a video curriculum that you're all going to watch in the living room together before you break up into groups. And so you're going to manage that. You may do announcements at this time, although I like to reserve them for the end, because all of a sudden all this conversation can happen about the announcements, about the church picnic that's coming up next week, and who's going to bring the deviled eggs, and blah, 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 blah. And you're eating into your discussion time if you do your announcements here. So I like to do them when we regather at the end. But then you break up in your turf groups for discussion. And so hypothetically, you got 4 places that you can naturally go to. And so you can have 3, 3, 3, and 4. Once you're up to 13 people, you're going to do that. And you're going to say, okay, we're going to break up into groups now. You all go in there, and you can break up in a variety of ways. Sometimes I did it really unstrategically. Everybody, count off 1, 2, 3, 4. And all the 1s go to the living room, all the 2 goes to the dining room, 3 goes to and that's what a group that's been around a while. Because of the apprenticing component, that's the other side of this, the 2 things going on the plate at one time. But other times I'll have my apprentices, my discussion leaders, they know that they're going to be leading a discussion. And so I'll say, okay, you 3 go with Bill in the living room. You 3 go with Nancy in the kitchen. You 3 go, you can break it up, and you're gonna have those people have the discussion questions in hand, and they're going to take them with them, and you're going to tell them this is how much time you're going to have. And so for here example, I got 25 minutes in the schedule, factored in the schedule for the turf groups, the discussion groups in the rooms. And here's one thing that's a big value of mine is the fewer questions, the better. And because when you break up into groups of 3 or 4 at most, discussion will happen. And so if you just do the math, a lot of times your curriculum will have like 12 questions. And so we got 25 minutes with 4 people talking, 12 questions, with just the 12 questions in 25 minutes, I got 2 minutes per question. And then I got 4 people. So everybody gets 30 seconds per question. And there's just, it's no way. And so I'll say, okay, of the 12 questions, if it's like printed curriculum from whoever we're using, I'll say, I want you guys to do questions 2, 7, 9, and 10. and I will have those questions already circled on the page, the handout page. And so I'm going to, because 4 questions in 25 minutes means they've got 6 minutes per question, which is still, with 4 people, it's still a minute and a half of conversation per person per question, but actually everybody gets to chime in with that. But if you do the math, 4 questions is a lot if everybody's talking. I mean, it's plenty if everybody's talking. It's 6 minutes per question. And so they're going to break up into the groups. And then that's where the surfing comes in, is I avoid the temptation to be one of the group leaders. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to surf from one room to the next. And I'm going to sit down at the kitchen table, and listen to the first question. And I might even chime in and give my answer, or say, oh, that was really good, or whatever. And then I'm going to get up a couple of minutes later. I'm going to go in the dining room and listen to where they're at, and see how that's going. And then I'm going to spend a couple of minutes, and I'm going to surf clockwise or counterclockwise, it doesn't matter, around the house for those 25 minutes. A couple things happen there. One of them is I can keep all the groups kind of on track. That typically there'll be one that gets stuck on question number 1 for 15 minutes, and they got 10 minutes left. And so I'll tell them, hey, everybody's ahead of you by a question. You got to move on. And they'll go, okay. And so that's helpful to try and keep everybody, because I know by surfing, when you don't surf and you lead one of the groups, you have no idea that discussion group back in the den, they only did 1 question out of 4. Now, it must have been a good conversation, but still, I'd like them to get through more than 1 question. And so I can keep them on track. I can also kind of edit, I can also kind of steer questions back to what's at hand. If the leader is having a hard time getting back on hand, I can interject and say, hey, let's make sure we stay on this part of the question. All right. And kind of saying, give my answer, and then get them going again, and then I'll move on. And this will feel really awkward the first time you do this for them. But once you've done that for one night, and the second night they go, oh, this is the way it works, and they don't get offended by you coming and sitting by a couple of minutes, kind of interact for half a question, and then you move on. And so, but here's the power of that. Then that's one of the difficulties of breaking up into buzz groups. Otherwise, is that you don't know if you can control kind of the theology or the crazy answers that come across when they're all over the house. How do you manage that? And the way that you do that is that then you reconvene back in the living room, and it's not just for prayer at the end. You're going to have your recap, and you're going to say, okay, the 4 questions, let's talk about these 4 questions now. First question was this. And what I'm going to do during the reconvene slot, after I've done the surfing, is I'm going to pick the best answer of the 4. And I'm going to say, man, Kevin, back in the kitchen, I heard him saying this. Kevin, what were you saying? And so what I've done then is I've kind of silenced the 3 bad answers, the people that were all off in Never Never Land with their answer. And I've picked the one that was the good answer. And Kevin gets affirmed by giving a good answer there. And then I'll say, okay, second question. What's the second question? Oh, yeah. And I'm going to interject a little bit more teaching there. But I try and leave it with the people that were actually saying the right things in their discussion. And then I'll say, okay, second question, I'll say, oh, now Sally, she was in the dining room. Sally, what were you saying about that? And sometimes they'll shy, and I'll ask the leader, so Cindy, what was Sally's good answer there? I heard her saying something really good. And so Cindy will kind of re-summarize her answer. And so then you only get 4 people then that answer those questions, but they're the right answers, right? Because you get to pick them. Now, when you do a group of 12 ones, you might have to go through several people, and everybody has to listen to the wrong answer. You may never get the right answer, and because not all 12 people are going to give their answer. And so I think it's more effective to get to the good answers and affirm the good ones, and kind of ignore the ones that weren't so good. And so then the next part of your meeting, then after you've done your recap, is you're going to do your prayer time, take prayer requests if you need that, announcements, and that's where you can talk about, here's the next couple things coming up at church, any other housekeeping about childcare for next week, or who's got the snacks for next week, whatever. Leave that all to the end so that it doesn't crunch into either your big group time where you talk about the content, or your discussion time, your turf groups. And because what'll happen is, rather than having 25 minutes, you'll have 18 minutes. And that 25 minutes is the best part of the night if you manage it well. And now here's another thing that can happen with when you break up into groups. And I hate to say this is difficult to say, but for you all that are on the Zoom tonight, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Is you have the opportunity with a buzz group like this, these smaller groups, to quarantine the crazy people. And what I mean by that is that there's that person that always gives that kind of bizarro answer. And you're like, what are they going to say tonight? Well, the good thing about when you send them to the kitchen is that only the other two people in the kitchen have to listen to the crazy answer that crazy Jerry says every week. And if you've got, and what I used to do when I first started doing this was I would try and break them up. And if there was more than one extra grace required person, break them up. But then what I started doing, and God bless her, I would give my wife, she would take one for the team and she would go to the kitchen and quarantine the two crazy people. And that would be the group, and she would be the leader. And the people that were going to say all the bizarro stuff, only my wife had to hear that. So all the other discussions happening in the other rooms were actually the good discussion happening. And I don't know if there's any other good way to say that, but that was my wife's service to the body of Christ at large, and was to go and kind of manage the discussion. Thankfully, she's a Bible college graduate and can kind of steer that back to theologically correct conversation. But maybe your group won't have one of those people. But if you're in a group of people and none of the people in your group look like that, you might be the crazy person. And so you'll have to be the one that's getting quarantined. But otherwise, that's one of the dynamics that you can work with this model, is to even manage that person that just, maybe they're not crazy, but they just commandeer their answers are never 2 minutes, they're 9-minute answers, and so you can put them all in one room. My wife is pretty assertive about groups, and she'll say, okay, kind of say, okay, Jerry, that's great, but I want to hear from Tom over here. Tom, what do you think about this? And so my wife is confident enough and assertive enough to be able to break in when they take a breath. Hopefully they take a breath and shift it over to the next person. And so anyway, that's another value of this surf and turf. But what happens here then, the bigger picture of what happens with this is that people that normally would never apprentice in a group naturally apprentice, because you've got 4 people who are not you that lead these discussions every Tuesday night. And I had a group that had been around a while, and I would do it where I would discover who was good. Because I would just say, in the living room, you 4 go. And then I would say, and Tom, you're leading the group tonight. And we were comfortable enough with that. And so when I'm surfing, I would go around and I realized Tom's horrible at this. But then I'd go to the next room, and I had just on the spot assigned John to be part of the group in the kitchen. And lo and behold, John, who's always kind of quiet, I haven't known him for very long, he's kind of new to our church, he's killing it leading the group. And I can tell you would never know that otherwise, that in the group of 12, he's going to speak up a couple times, 3 times, because he's new to the group, new to the church. But instantly, who your prospective future group leaders are, because they're not, and typically our apprentices, to be honest, they apprentice doing all the bigger picture stuff to lead that large group in the living room. And then they lead the prayer time and announcements, all that in the end. But what we really want our leaders to be really good at and apprenticing at is leading that spiritual conversation really well. And so that it's a different task. Or we teach our small group leaders, or we try to teach them how to do that really awkward setting of this group of 12 people and trying to have a conversation with one person talking, 11 people not talking, trying to find out who the people are that are talking and figure out how I can invite them into the conversation, how I can try and silence the people that talk every week and we've heard enough from them. That group of 12 is just crazy. And if we even do apprentice, which most churches don't apprentice assertively and strategically, but if you do, we're teaching them a really awkward thing that's really hard. And it's no wonder they don't like to lead groups, because we're teaching them something, we're having them try to learn something that's really difficult that never happens otherwise in our American culture. And so you can tell that I love this kind of group. The dynamic of this kind of group, the turf and surf groups, is that it can be about you, obviously. That there's a lot of group leaders that they love to be the one imparting all the information, managing the conversation and all that. And this is really about empowering everyone to talk, number one, but it's also empowering people that might never be leaders to get to lead that 20-minute conversation. And you'll be surprised at who starts doing that well. People that you would never know, new people that you would never discover for another year or whatever, as you can get them on track to be a future leader way earlier, because you've seen them as you surf around. And if you don't surf, you don't see that. If you lead the group in the kitchen, you're not going to see that Tom is actually really good at this over in the living room. And so you got to surf to see who's going to apprentice well, who's not going to apprentice well currently, or whatever. And so I think I've showed all my slides there. So we've got a couple of questions already. Let me see if I can answer. Bill Newton says, you definitely can use this in a Sunday school class. Is one of the questions. If it's a large group of more than 16, I would do this often. And I can tell you, I use this a lot, that people will get used to moving their chairs, even if you do it. Like I've been in some houses sometimes where there's only 2 rooms that it really worked at. And so I will just say, you 3 over on this side of the living room, and you 3 are over on this side of the living room, and you then over in the kitchen, and people get used to moving their chairs and then moving them back. And so if you're in a Sunday school setting, someone's asked about that, you could definitely use this. And you'd be surprised if the first time you say it, they say, this will be a little awkward. Don't worry about standing up and moving your chairs into a little pod. Make sure they do that well the first time, because you're going to want to encourage that every time. And so you can say, so you can put up on the board, here's your 3 questions to talk about in groups of 3, go. And they might be a little surprised if that's not normal, but still, I would be surfing around that Sunday school classroom, listening for the good answers, and say, okay, everybody, let's come back. Let's talk about that first question. And I heard Sally over here, man, she was telling this story about when she was growing up, and Sally, well, and just so really, raise up the really good answers by that. And you don't have to listen to everybody's answers doing that. So that's one of the questions. I don't know if you've got another question. Roger Carr says, what kind of group is this? Is it Bible group, life group, discipleship group? What's the mission? And really, it could be a variety of one of those. I think that the dynamic in play, the principle in play, is regardless of what type of group it is, it's getting people to be and express their discipleship journey with a couple other people. And another power of breaking into buzz groups, whether you do it in this setting or some other way, like I was taught in college just for the opening part. One of the things that's a principle that I didn't do much as often, that I would just kind of break when you say count off all the ones go to that room, all the twos that room, pretty unstrategic. But I do like to break groups up into guys and gals if it's fairly even. I'd say you 3 guys go in the dining room, and the other 3 guys go in the kitchen. 3 ladies here, 3 ladies here, because there are introverted gals that will talk more when it's just 3 gals in the kitchen, and there are introverted guys that will talk in the dining room when it's just 3 guys. And so even if it's a group of 4 and it's 2 guys and 2 gals, sometimes, not always, but sometimes the conversation is not as robust just because of the gender issues there. Excuse me, I need some. I would also say that you can at times then break guys and gals for prayer time at the end, even in the living room, in the buzz groups that they were just a part of. And so guys will feel more comfortable often just praying with a group of guys, and same is true for ladies. And so there's a power, even if you don't use this for your whole session. I would break up into smaller groups of gender classed groups for prayer time, because I think your prayer time will be more effective if you do it that way as well. All right, let me see if there's any more questions here. All right, none that would really, if anybody wants to chime in, but our time is just about up. And I would if you're going to try this, which, like Kevin, my hype man on the video, tried it one night, is go ahead and don't surprise people. You might say the week before, hey, next week we're going to try a new format that I think is going to really encourage better conversation. And so just give them a heads up. And then when the first time you do it, say, here's how this is going to work. We're going to break up and blah, 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 blah. And we think conversation is going to go better. We're just going to do 3 or 4 questions tonight. And if you get done with your question early, go to the kitchen and get some more snacks or whatever, and kind of talk out loud. Don't just all of a sudden say, okay, we'll break up it in groups, go. You got to lead them through that. But like Kevin experienced his first night, there are some people that'll say, that was awesome. And it's not because that group of 12 is just so intimidating to most people. It's a situation we never have. I'm reminded, if you go out to dinner after church to a Mexican restaurant, I don't know why most evangelical Christians go to a Mexican restaurant after church, but that seems to be number one choice. But if it's a long table, even just 3 couples, 6 people, it is not just one conversation. But if you get 8 or 10 or 12 people like this long table, there's all these conversations going on, robust conversations going on. But it's really awkward if there's 10 people at that Mexican restaurant in this long table. If there's only one person talking and the other 9 people have to sit there and listen to the one guy talking, that's awkward, to be honest. And so to say that's the kind of discussion we're going to have in our small groups just seems counterintuitive when you think about it. And so I would encourage you to give this a shot and see if it doesn't work for you as well, or at least some of the principles of that on the front end of the icebreakers, getting people to start talking, I think can be valuable. Staying in the same room, but kind of cutting it half this room, half the room over here, half the room over there. But the principle is, I was a math major along with a Christian education major. Just the percentage of people talking gets elevated, and I think that's where the power is of life change actually happening, is when you have to express what you're trying to do with your spiritual journey here. All right. Well, we're just about done. I want to thank you for joining the group tonight, and I want to encourage you to invite other people at your church that are leaders to watch this group. Say, hey, you might want to try this at your group as well. If they've got a group on Thursday nights that's been meeting a couple of years and they're looking for something to kind of move the needle on that, it can really work. And for all the other webinars that we have, I'd like to invite you to share the prayer videos with your prayer team leader or the missions team leader or the safety and security team leader. We also have a podcast that we have that drops twice a month. That has now passed well over 6,000 downloads in the last 2 years. So we're really proud of that. Some great conversations with ministry leaders all across the Waypoint region and beyond. And we're up to about 60 episodes, and that you can see the titles of them. And so some of them might be very interesting to you personally. And then we've also got a Pastor's Wives podcast that just finished its 2nd season, had over 1,200 downloads. And so if you're not the pastor at your church or the pastor's wife, I'd love for you to encourage your pastor's wife by saying, hey, there's a podcast that Waypoint does just for you. And so connect them to that podcast that just wrapped up season number 2. And they average 100 downloads a month. And so would love for you to do that. We, of course, always are thankful for Mid-Atlantic Christian University being our partner with this. And we're thankful for you, our partners. We envision an ever-increasing number of thriving churches and leaders in our region. And we hope that the way you structure your small groups helps your group thrive. And a result of that, the community, the koinonia that happens at your church thrive as well. So thanks for being a part of this. This one posted to YouTube in just a couple of days, and you can invite other people to do that. And we hope to see you next time. Next month, our webinar is called, it's a friend of mine who wrote a book called Dying to Restart. And it's about churches choosing a strategic death for a resurrected life. And so there are churches that you may know of that are getting down to the very end of their life cycle, and to do that well so that they leave a legacy, a kingdom legacy that'll last far longer than their church, is the conversation we're going to be having next month in July with my friend Greg Wines and his co-leader Dan Turner. So some of you might want to join us for that, or you may know some people that need to hear that conversation. We'll see you then. Have a good night.